The thoughts, views, and comments expressed by Sidebar, its guests, callers, and advisors are not necessarily those of the management, ownership, or production unit of ILS Verizon Media Group. Sidebar, a 103.5 The Beat podcast, is a production of ILTV Studios and may not be reproduced or represented, in part or in its entirety, without the express written consent of Verizon Media Group. Sidebar is the intellectual property of Verizon Media Group. Copyright 2024. All rights reserved.
This is Sidebar, a 103 The Beat podcast powered by ILTV. I'm Stephen Hanna. I like how I say it as though you didn't know who I was. Or maybe you don't. Let's not be so haughty in this Christmas season. Today, as Christmas rapidly approaches, doesn't it feel like Christmas just sprung up on us this year? Like, I still feel like I'm in the first days of December. I am in no way, shape, or form prepared for the capitalist onslaught that is Christmas. I have done 0 purchases. I am not prepared for Christmas, and not the traditional way that we celebrate Christmas. I have no concrete plans. Plans are being made around me, for me. Part of me wants to escape these plans. But in doing that, in those moments, it is perhaps best to reflect on what is the meaning of Christmas, what is the reason for the season. And if you are of a certain age and you grew up on 12:40 a.m., which I don't even think exists anymore, you would hear persons all the time saying, well, don't forget that Jesus is the reason for the season. I mean, people probably still say that. And that is too complicated a conversation to ever get into with the expectation of resolving it in 1 hour. I don't want to talk about what is the origins of Christmas, because I feel like that's just a long circle argument just to come back to where we started in the first place. What I would like to talk about is, assuming that we're all on the same page, that Christmas is some sort of, well, first, before we get to that, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that there are bad actors. There are persons who, like everything else, will take advantage of the moment and lazily phone it in. I say that as a person who's standing before you, not in a dress shirt, but inside a gray t-shirt. But inevitably, at some point, you may hear somebody saying something ridiculous like, oh, you got to put the Christ back in Christmas. And I remember being a kid, and pastors every year would preach over and repeatedly about how Xmas was a blatant attempt to remove the word Christ out of Christmas, and that the X was being stomped on there in a similar way that, like, Generation X, like this unknown, or it doesn't mean what you think it means, and it's like this modern day interpretation of Christmas where we remove Christ out of it. But that's not true. And like, I knew that as a kid, because any dictionary where you look up the word Xmas will tell you that Xmas means Christmas, because the X is the first letter in the word Christ if you spell it in Greek. And so this isn't even a modern day phenomenon. This has been a representation of the word Christ for centuries. And it is only persons who are, once again, lazily phoning it in, who are saying things and don't know what they're talking about, who are reading but do not understand what they're reading, and then say, oh, I think this means this, and therefore this. And they're just preaching a bunch of gobbledygook, and they're leading people astray, and people are willing to sit down and argue what I believe Paul calls pointless genealogies, and has nothing to do with the message of Christianity, or in this case, Christmas. Which is why I'm avoiding the whole conversation of where does Christmas originate, the Christmas tree and pagan festivals and all the different stuff, because in the grand scheme of things, and I had this conversation earlier this week with a friend, anything that has survived human history this long does not survive without some level of violence accompanying it. Everything has a complicated history. You cannot pretend that there is something that makes it all the way to the modern day era and there is no complications involved in that. I can say we all agree slavery is bad, but then it becomes more complicated when we start saying things like, all right, if slavery is bad, then we should throw away everything that came as a result of it, which includes the English language. And the English language is the greatest form of colonialization. And so now do we all abandon it and only speak languages of our forefathers when we don't know who our forefathers were? Or do we say life is more complicated than just black and white, right and wrong, left and right? We have to understand that this is the language that we have, even though it was passed on to us through complicated means. We're talking about Christmas. So let's circle back to Christmas. What is the point of Christmas? Like, what are we doing exactly? You look around and there are certain things, and this is a problem that we have with a lot of our holidays, right? Holidays, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, the best ones are tied to some sort of act that can be performed through participation in consumerism, through capitalism, right? And this is even for the fake holidays. So Mother's Day is not a real holiday. You don't get the day off of Mother's Day. Mother's Day is on a Sunday for a reason. And it is celebrated by buying gifts for your mother, taking your mother out and spending money on her. And you say, oh, well, we're showing her that we appreciate her. Fine, cool. Valentine's Day, not a real holiday. You don't get the day off of Valentine's Day. But there is this immense societal pressure to purchase things, to buy things, to show how much you love someone, to dress up in a way that demonstrates that you love this person. But then we have actual holidays, actual holy days, that we don't know what to do with those days because there is no consumerism tied to it. And therefore, the original message of the holiday is lost. Whit Monday. Now, if you're Catholic or super Anglican, you probably know what Whit Monday is about, or Greek Orthodox. I don't know if they celebrate it, but I feel like they would. They understand what Whit Monday is. The rest of us don't. We get a day off, and we don't know why. We're not religious enough to celebrate it in the correct way. We're not religiously inclined enough to go figure out what it's about. Then we have holy days or holidays that are not even religious, that are secular in nature, that we still don't celebrate because there is no tie to any sort of let's spend money and this whole economic societal pressure where because we built a world around money, we need money. Majority Rule Day is January 10th. What way is that celebrated? No one knows. There is no collective activity for us to all do. Things happen on that day, and everybody enjoys a day off. But because capitalism has trained us so well, if there is not a thing, an activity that we can participate in that is easy to participate in, because all we got to do is just spend some money, then the meaning is quickly lost. And there are few people who can tell you what is the story behind majority rule. Matter of fact, the story that we actually have is not, it's already being bastardized and messed up. And we'll circle back to that in 2 weeks because we're talking about Christmas. So if Christmas is about celebrating Christ, what do any of those words mean? Why has Christ come? How are we to celebrate this thing? And I'm not saying, hey, let's all go hang out in a church until 12 a.m. That's what watch night service is for, all right? But if we've all agreed that Christmas is important, it's like, oh, it's a time for giving, it's a time for sharing. Those words mean nothing without what? How? Because it really often feels like by giving and sharing, what we mean is, if you have the money to spend, now is the time to spend it. And those are the only people who are actually participating in Christmas. And even if you do it under the guise of saying, oh, the same way Christ was a gift to the world, I'm giving you this gift. Why was he given to the world? All right? The story of Christmas is supposed to be a story about the gospel, the good news. But what does that mean? And it once again comes down to something where we're saying words, but the words don't necessarily mean what we think they mean. And no one's ever taken the time to go back and look at it and say, wait a minute, hold on a second. Because I grew up in a Baptist environment, and growing up in a Baptist environment, as well as a Church of God environment, let's just say Pentecostal for safety reasons, you tend to also be splashed with a little bit of American evangelism. You know what I'm talking about. The televangelist people, all right? Because they phrase things really well and they package it well. They're good at marketing or propaganda, depending on how you feel about it. You'd hear a person say, the good news is that Christ came and died for our sins so that we could be reconnected back to God. And I'm not going to argue that that is not a part of the gospel, and that if you put all the words together, including what Paul says, along with the apostles who actually lived and walked and worked with Christ, if you put all those things together, then you kind of come to that conclusion. However, and this is the part some of you are going to say, huh, and others of you will say, this boy is talking foolishness, and throw something at the television. Either way, if Christ came to die, and that is the gospel, what gospel was he preaching while he was alive? Because all through Luke and Matthew and Mark, he's preaching the gospel. If he's preaching the gospel, and the gospel is that he came to die, then it would not have been a shock to his disciples when he died. So the gospel must be more than just the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. They were shocked. They didn't see it coming. They didn't know that he was going to die. That's why Peter cut the guy's ear off. That's why when he's like, somebody's going to betray me, they're like, what? No, I'd never do it. Like, they had those conversations. We reenact that all the time. We know that, hey, they didn't see it coming. And they were with him for 3 years, day and night, traveling all over the towns. And the Bible says he was preaching the gospel. So what was the gospel he was preaching? And that's the part that is easy to ignore because it doesn't fit into all the other stuff. We have accepted a very, what's the word? False gospel. Generally speaking, it's not even a prosperity gospel. It's something, at this point, more devious than that. We don't think that if we do good, God will do good for us. We think that God owes us something. As well as we feel as though anybody who doesn't have something, it is a punishment of theirs. They're not trying hard enough to serve God by doing things that God didn't ask us to do. All right, so let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. You are watching and listening to Sidebar 103 The Beat Podcast, powered by ILTV. I'm Stephen Hanna. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Paradise Premium Foods, where exceptional taste meets everyday convenience. Right in the heart of Hurricane Hole Plaza, whether you're planning a beachside brunch, an intimate dinner, or simply restocking your favorites, we offer only the finest selection of local and imported goods, handpicked for quality, freshness, and flavor. At Paradise Premium Foods, shopping is effortless, service is personal, and every visit feels like a treat. From gourmet meals to go to organic essentials and indulgent treats, this is your neighborhood market elevated. Live well, eat better. Discover Paradise Premium Foods, now open at Hurricane Hole Plaza, Paradise Island. Paradise Premium Foods. Taste the difference.
So you want a space, but not just any space. You need something with a little more potential. So how about 1,000 square feet of room to play with? Superb audio and video production capability, digital LED wall, full lighting grid, and about 124 seats to accommodate a full studio audience with so many other features. Make us your home for your next concert, conference, and so much more. Honestly, the possibilities are endless. Here at ILTV Studios, we'd love to bring your next event to life. So what do you say? Do you want our space?
Welcome back to Sidebar, a 103 to B podcast powered by ILTV. I'm Stephen Hanna. There is something quite ridiculous where we can sit down and all of us have come to the conclusion that abortion is wrong. That even though that is never spoken about directly in the Bible, we can come to the conclusion that lying is wrong, even though there are times when a lying spirit has been sent out in service of the plan of God. We can all sit down and say, this is not a Christian thing to do based on a particular interpretation of something. I remember growing up as a kid, there was a religious program that used to come on every Sunday, and it would start off with the kingdom suffered violence and the violence took it by force. And to this day, I do not know what that means. It just sounds like a cool thing to say. But we were okay with it. But the crazy thing is, there are portions of the Bible that explicitly say, if you are down with God, if you are following God's commands, then you will do this thing. And then we don't do those things. We don't preach about them. We don't enact them. We don't do anything with them. We completely ignore them. You're not supposed to charge your brother interest when you lend them something. That's an abomination. It's an abomination in the same book where a man should not lay with another man is an abomination. And when I say the book, I don't mean the Bible. I mean inside the actual book, right? But we ignore that. And you could be a bank teller. You could be a bank manager. You could own a bank and still sit in the front row of a church. And nobody sees any issue with that. But we do see an issue with somebody being gay. And here's the thing. I'm not asking you to change your opinion on either of those things. I'm asking you to do the positive things that were asked of you, which is very simple. There are 2 commands that are greater than all others. Love the Lord God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. In those 2 things are all the commands. And people will say they do the first one, but in what way? And then, at least I don't think people lie about whether or not they do the second one. Because for sure, I don't think they do it. I don't think people love their neighbor as they love themselves. I don't think people love their family as they love themselves. I don't think people love their kids or their spouse as much as they love themselves. And then sometimes I don't think people even love themselves. So that also is another issue. But we're talking about Christmas. Why hath Christ come? And the only thing you can do is you say, well, the easiest way is if you figure out, based on the Gospels, what Christ has said is the reason, or something approximate or close to it. Now, it would be fun if I was just able to go and read the nativity story and then the baby Jesus says something specific. But that is not where we're going. So I had to pull up the Bible app on my phone. Go into Luke chapter 4. I know this is so... Anyway, we're good. Luke chapter 4, verse 18. All right? Well, let's start at 16. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. We're talking about Jesus here. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." The good news to the poor. And for those of you who are just joining us, if Christmas is all about the gospel just means good news. The word good news there is the same word, right? The gospel to the poor. The good news to the poor. Freeing the people who are enchained. Recovery of sight to the blind. Freedom to the prisoners. Proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. I don't hear people talking about that. And he says, this stuff has been fulfilled in your hearing today. I was anointed for this purpose, to give good news to the poor. And throughout Christ's ministry, we hear him saying over and over again how you are to treat the poor. That it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter heaven, which is said after a rich guy comes up to Christ and says, "Hey man, what do I need to do?" And Jesus says to him, "Hey, obey all the laws of Moses." He said, "Man, I've been doing that since I was a kid. I got that. What else?" "Okay, well, sell everything you have and give it to the poor and follow me." And he walked away, and he was so sad that they could see it. It wasn't that Jesus said to them, "Look how sad he is. I could feel the sadness in the spirit." No, it's like they could see it on the guy's face. It's like, and Jesus says to them, "It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle," and it's not a magical gate. That's what American evangelicals like to say it is, but that's not a thing. There is no small gate called the eye of a needle. That's something that somebody made up to justify them not wanting to give up their wealth. Over and over again, we are told, you got to look out for the poor. You shouldn't be greedy. Matter of fact, I mean, the early church is pretty. They were kind of calmy. They were like, there's a lot of everything in kind. Everybody sell their property, and whatever anybody needs, we share it out equally amongst each other. But that's not a message that you often hear. And even though you occasionally hear people say that Christmas is a time to be charitable, for how long? For like a day? You know what I mean? It's supposed to be the beginning of something and not necessarily a single soul event. And charities will tell you this, that they can get donations during the Christmas time. This is why they have to push so hard during the Christmas time to beg for donations, because in February, nobody cares about the poor. In March, nobody cares about the poor. In May, no one cares about the poor. In June, July, and August, nobody cares about the poor. And if we were to bring it back to the earliest thought where, well, the likelihood of Jesus being born December 25th, if we hold the stories in Luke and Matthew to be historically accurate or have some level of historicity, then Jesus wouldn't have been born in the winter. He would have been born in the spring, because why would you have shepherds in a field in the middle of winter? But then again, who knows? All right? So should we be celebrating Christmas, I don't know, in May, when nobody cares about the poor? When the good news of Christ coming, the anointed one coming to give the gospel to the poor, to free the prisoners, nobody cares about that stuff in May. What are we doing? What are we doing it all for? As an excuse to dress up? I mean, listen, if we're only doing the Christmas stuff because blindly doing this helps us to escape momentarily the dreaded machine that we are all a part of, and we do not have the bravery and the courage to escape this endless dying hamster wheel of capitalism, then fine. But let's not pretend that it's something that it isn't, because we're not doing the other thing that we say it is. I've said this before, all right? Jesus says, hey guys, there'll come a time where I will say to you, oh man, thanks. You gave me food when I was hungry. You gave me clothes when I was naked. You gave me shelter. You did all these things for me. Thank you so much. And you'll say, Lord, when were you ever hungry? Or when were you naked? When did we clothe you? When did this happen? I don't remember this happen. I think I would remember doing these things for you. And I'm paraphrasing here. Jesus is like, you do this for the least of these, you're doing it for me. So if we are to take it back to Christmas, and we are here honoring the arrival of the Anointed One, we are honoring the birth of Christ. And he's saying, you want to give me a gift? You don't have to put on fancy clothes and go to church and light 30 candles. You don't have to sit in your best Sunday clothes and eat dinner with a horrible family that is just, between the food and the conversation, giving you high blood pressure. If you want to give me a gift, I'm physically here as far as the Bible says. You can go and give it. And I'm saying this to you, but I'm actually saying it to myself as well, because this is the hardest part. The hardest thing in the world to do is to look at a wretched person and see that is Jesus. That's what Jesus said. That's if you're giving it, if there's a dirty, filthy, naked, snotty nose, coal in the eye, dribbling on themselves, Jones on the side of the road, where their skin is sinewy and falling off of their bones, and it's just dirt. It's like you could see the dirt and grime. They are the color of tar, not from melanin, but from the actual settling of exhaust smoke on their body, because they are outside day and night. And the only time that they are ever washed is when the rain falls on their skin. can you look at that person and see Jesus? Can you look at that person and say, there is my Lord. Let me go and give him food. Let me give him some clothes. And you know what? If you can only do it during Christmas, you're better than most of us. Now, this is something that I do actually struggle with, because I will tell you, there are times where I will see someone and I am violently fighting the urge to, like, I can feel, like, in the back of your throat when you see something so repulsive that you want to spit. I feel that. And so I'm not telling you this out of like, oh, I'm better than you, because when I see the poor, I find them repugnant at times. And that is the time when I know that I am failing. That is who I need to love the most. That is who I need to help the most. The people who I'm afraid if they touch me, because I'm like, I don't know. This guy, this is patient zero for something. But that's also Jesus. And then if we are to, believe in the univocality of the Bible, and that all of it leads to one massive story that leads us to Christ, that leads us to God, it says that he had no beauty that we should behold him. There is nothing about him that would make us say, oh, what a beautiful man. When he was physically here on earth, you could not tell the disciples apart. Beyond that, Paul says in one of his many letters, whether or not they're pseudo, in one of the many letters ascribed to Paul, it says that Christians, we are the fearful scent of death and doom. I think that's in Galatians or Corinthians, one of them. We are the fearful scent of death and doom. That means that when people see Christians, actual flesh and blood Christians, it is a reminder of their own humanity, their end that is coming. Like, this is like, seeing you is annoying. So like, there is nothing that we should not shirk away from the image and the idea of this person, for lack of a better term, this Jonesa over here. Look at this person. They are wretched. They look disgusting. They're dirty. They're filthy. They can never repay me back any good that I do for them. Throughout Christianity, throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, those are the people that we are supposed to be involved with. Those are the people that we are to desire to be around. A deacon is not a magical position where you get it because you preach kind of good and you read kind of good. The original purpose of the deacons was because the apostles were so busy that they were like, hey, we're organizing the church. We're spreading the message. But part of what we have been called to do as the church in general is to take care of the widows and the orphans, to feed people. We have a food program that's going on all day, every day. But are we going to abandon this stuff to wait tables? And that's where the deacons come in. And that's where we get Stephen, the first Christian martyr, according to Acts, right? So it's all built into the structure. That is what we are supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be feeding, clothing, sheltering. These are the things that we are supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be bringing the good news to the poor. If you are poor, and if that is your designation in life, what is the greatest news that you could hear? That you are no longer poor. And not in a metaphysical sort of way. This is like a literal thing. And I think a lot of times people try to get their way out of it and wiggle their way out of it and say, oh yeah, you're poor now, but in heaven the streets will be paved with gold. here's the thing, depending on your interpretation of the scriptures, we don't go to heaven. When this becomes the new heaven and new earth, and God reigns here, and we're here. But also, Christ doesn't say, don't worry about it, guys. In the future, that person you saw starving, when they're dead, they'll have food. No, this is a literal now thing. You should be feeding people now, clothing them now. If the good news to the poor is something, it would probably be to not be poor. It would be for us to enact something that changes that position in their life. And let's not forget, to free the captives, to free the prisoners, to give sight to the blind. Like, these are, I don't want to put modern labels on it and be like, oh, it's prison reform and all this other stuff. But if it is a literal thing, there are people who are in prison, whether that is imprisoned by debt or actually in prison. What are we doing for them? And you say, oh, well, they're in jail for a reason because they're criminals. Well, okay, so they're wretched. They're wretched, horrible people. They are the least among us. They are despised. So they're like Jesus. And if this is Christmas, and if the reason for the season is that Christ has come and it is for Christ, and we are celebrating Christ, what better way to celebrate Christ than to go into the prisons and spend time with him? That's just the thought and time I had. So it's like, if we are celebrating Christmas and it's saying give sight to the blind. Now, I'm not assuming that by me talking to you, that you will be bestowed supernatural powers to grant people the gift of vision. But some of you have enough money to buy glasses for a couple people, to go online and be like, oh, this person is trying to raise funds for a medical expense. Let me throw a couple of dollars that way. Matter of fact, if that's what you want to do, you would be following along and helping to fulfill that prophecy. This is the reason that Christ has come. This is what he was anointed to do. To heal the sick, to free the prisoners, to change the position of the poor. This is the good news. This is the gospel. And I dare you to find something in the Bible that contradicts any of that. Because it doesn't. I say all that. Not that you shouldn't have gingerbread cookies or, I don't know, hang out with your friends, because community is great. Spend time with your family and friends. But if we are celebrating Christ, and if Jesus is the reason for the season, what reason had Christ come? So the next time that I feel like Nassau people have become like Freeport people and they don't walk anywhere. But the next time you are traveling and traversing these streets, particularly while you are stuck in horrible bumper-to-bumper traffic, and you are trying to rush to get a gift of some sort, and you're about to put yourself in a hole so that you can start 2026 off incorrectly with 2 empty pockets and phone calls that you are avoiding from the bank. But there's somebody on the side of the road and they're like asking for a quarter or something, or they're mumbling something, or they're in need of something. And there are times where I look at the person and be like, this person don't need nothing. But that is, who am I to say? That's not for us to judge. If the person is out here willing to ask What's the good book say? Ask, you shall receive. Anyway, if we are to follow Christ this Christmas and say this is the reason for the season, then let's do it. Let's go all the way. Find a wretched person. I'm going to stop saying wretched, but we got to help the poor. You have to help the poor. Now, there's a whole different conversation as to who is the poor, because some of you who I am talking to are the poor, and you don't realize it, and you don't want to acknowledge that, because you feel like the minute you acknowledge that you are the poor, it is like when somebody finds out that they have cancer and it's like suddenly they decline immediately, they lose 50 pounds overnight because, oh no, the weight of the truth has hit me so significantly. So you live in denial, but your life is still shortened. The whole point is you can only fight the problem if you acknowledge the problem exists. Many of us are poor. If you have to work to make money, you are poor. If you have to exchange your time, literally your life essence, for money, you are poor. Now, if you, and this is one of those things, sorry, this is a sidebar, I apologize, but they're one of those things that people tend to forget and think about. They're like, oh, how much money does a rich person make per this and that? And there's always that example that, well, Bill Gates, if he were to walk down the road and he saw $100 bill, it would be a waste of his time to pick up $100 bill. He wouldn't even wait, because he makes more money inside the few seconds it'll take for him to pick up that $100 bill than to pick up the $100 bill. That's where you're wrong. Of course he'd pick up the $100 bill, because that's not how rich people actually make money. Rich people make money because they have so much money, the money itself makes money. If you have enough money, you can put it in a bank, or you can put it in a mutual fund, or you can put it anywhere. And the interest from that money, from people borrowing from you, will be enough to make more money. The problem is that the rest of us don't have enough money for us to make any significant interest off of the money just sitting there. In fact, we tend to lose the money if we put it inside a bank and don't do anything with it, because there's not enough money. I say all to say, if you are not rich enough to live off the interest of your money, then you are not rich. You are still poor. You're a different degree of poor. You're a different shade of poor. You are the type of poor that is necessary to prevent the super poor from destroying the super rich. You're a buffer. They've named you the middle class, but you're poor. If you lose your job, you lose your house and your car. Your wife would look at you sideways. You might not even have a wife. You wouldn't have shoes. But the whole point is, there's a lot of poor people. But with that said, Christ has given us away. All things in kind. Those of us who have enough to share a little, to lend a little to those who are less than us, as opposed to looking down on them, to look at them and say, I see Christ inside you. And as I celebrate Christmas this year, I celebrate by giving to you as though you are Christ, asking for a loaf of bread, asking for a coat, asking for help finding a place to live. That is how I choose to celebrate Christmas this year. And I hope maybe somebody out there hears that and does that. Or at the very least, you have a great argument for the next time your annoying cousin starts to bring up, Christmas is a pagan celebration. Be like, well, let me ask you, when's the last time you actually read your Bible? Anyway, we're going in circles. So, it's been great talking with you. I think we have one more before we wrap up 2025. It's been a long year. Anyway, this has been Sidebar, a 103 to B podcast powered by ILTV. I'm Stephen Hanna. True God still.